Welcome, everybody, to Tino's Time. And on this episode, we are going to recap Championship Week. After 17 weeks, COVID galore, injuries to all of our big name players, free agent waiver wire pickups that saved us, rookies that came out of nowhere and maybe led you to a championship. The dust is settled, there's no more fantasy football, and to everybody that won their championship, congratulations. Your boy Tino won in one of his leagues. He took home $400. I'll take it all day long. To everybody else that won their fantasy football league, congratulations. Everyone deserves some type of credit for winning this year. It was one of the craziest seasons I've ever seen. So let's not waste any more time and let's start recapping everything that happened in championship week. And if you had all these things happen, you either lost and you took home second place, or you're sitting at home right now with the trophy in the ring and you're having money baths. The Bengals, we talked about it last week. You needed to start every single one of your Bengals, and the Bengals continued to play Madden in real life. It's unreal what the Bengals offense is doing. Jamar Chase went ridiculous and he went crazy for 11 receptions, 200 plus yards, and 3 touchdowns. He had 55 fantasy points. If you had him and Joe Burrow, that was 110 fantasy points from 2 guys. You must have took home your ring right after the noon games. You were feeling good. You didn't even need to watch the 3 o'clock or the Sunday night games. What was that, AB? What in the world were you doing? This man, Antonio Brown, after being one of the best receivers in the league for so many years, he's kind of had some issues. But on Sunday, during the game versus the Jets, the Buccaneers were losing, and Antonio Brown decided that, you know what, I'm gonna take off my jersey, I'm gonna take off my gloves, I'm gonna throw it into the field of play, I'm gonna just throw my jersey on the sideline, I'm gonna take some more gloves and throw it into the crowd. Antonio, what in the hell are you doing? He ran off the field and he put his arms up in the air like he's Randy Orton RKO. It was like, what in the hell are you doing? You went from being one, like I said, one of the best receivers in the game, and now you're becoming the biggest joke in the NFL. He was released after the game, and Bruce Arians said he hopes the best for him. But I mean, what are you gonna do? You can't have a player like that. And it's kind of funny because after Antonio left, the Buccaneers ended up coming back, and Tom Brady did goatish things, and he led the Buccaneers to a W. What now? Fantasy football season is over, and we still have another week of the regular season. Are you going to do daily? Are you getting ready for a playoff challenge? What are we going to do next? Don't you worry, we'll get into all of that. But before we do, let's talk about the Monday night game. It all came down to this. If you had Nick Chubb, Deontay Johnson, if you had Najee Harris, maybe you were starting Big Ben in a 2 quarterback league. It all came down to the Monday nighter, the Browns and the Steelers. This was Big Ben's last home game in Heinz Field, and somebody I was watching NFL Network, and he made a good point. Big Ben playing 18 seasons with the Steelers is something that really never happens. We've seen Peyton Manning go from the Colts to the Broncos, Brady go from the Patriots to the Buccaneers. Even though Rivers never won one, he went from San Diego to the Colts. It just doesn't happen. So Big Ben was ready to put on a show. And he didn't have great numbers, but that Steelers defense sacked Baker Mayfield 8+ times. They intercepted him, and Baker just cannot. Baker and the Browns look like a team that is lost. But Big Ben had 123 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. And in fantasy, that's not really good numbers, but this game was for Ben, and as long as the Steelers were able to put on a show and win this game, then that's all that mattered. Najee Harris had 188 yards and 1 touchdown, and he had a 50+ yarder at the end of the game, and I don't even know how many people won their championships because of that, but if you did, congratulations, because Najee was one of the best draft picks of the season, and I'm one of those that always kinds of like stays away from the rookies, But that's one of the things I learned this year is that you can draft these rookies and they could lead you to a championship. Deontay Johnson, he had 8 receptions for 31 yards and a touchdown. He had 17 points. So if you were down by 10 or 15 and you needed that, you won. Congratulations. But if you needed like 20, 25, I'm sorry, but you probably took the L. On the other side of the ball for the Browns, nobody, I don't know what it was, but Baker Mayfield continues to throw interceptions. He's thrown 6 interceptions in the last 2 games. He had 2 touchdowns and 182 yards. And at one point, Nick Chubb had more rushing yards than Baker had passing yards. And Baker started off for like 2 for 13 in the passing game. And I was facing Nick Chubb. I was up by 23 points, and the guy I was facing had Nick Chubb. As much as I'm happy that Nick Chubb had a really bad game and I was able to take the W and take home the title this year, that it was ridiculous to watch the Browns play offense and not use Nick Chubb, one of the best players in the game. Dearness Johnson got more rushing attempts at one point, and even Lewis Riddick said it on their broadcast. He was like, "Why is Nick Chubb not in the game?" And as happy as I am that he didn't, it just made no sense for the Browns' perspective. Peoples-Jones, Deontay Peoples-Jones, he had 3 receptions for 76 yards and 10.6 points. And if you were starting him in any which way, I hope you only needed 10 points, because he was somebody I really was not going to be worrying about and really wanting to be relied on in the fantasy championship. Now that we talked about the Monday night game, let's talk about the disappointments. Let's get into the injuries first before we get to the disappointments. And let's talk about the guys that got injured, or they were put on the COVID list, or they just didn't play and they got hurt during the games. And if you had these guys, hopefully they didn't cost you. I had one of these guys, and thank God he didn't cost me. Justin Fields did not play. He is still injured. Jared Goff also did not play, and he was out. Tim Boyle made Amon St. Brown look like Stephon Diggs and Justin Jefferson out there. Okay, then I'll take it. Kirk Cousins was put on the COVID list on Friday, Saturday, and he was not able to play on Sunday, and the Packers ended up demolishing the Vikings and ended up clinching the first seed. So now the NFC playoffs have to go through Lambeau Field in Green Bay. Great. Lamar Jackson is still injured, but they did say that he has possibility to play this week in Week 18, and the Ravens are still alive in the playoff picture. They do need a lot of things to happen and stuff, but they are still alive, and we'll see what happens. Ronald Jones, the biggest trap of the week, and I fell for it. Thank God he didn't cost me, but I thought he was going to have a great game versus the Jets, and he goes out and he got hurt. He injured his ankle, and, that kind of stopped him. But we were expecting something more, and Ronald Jones, Rojo, you're lucky he didn't cost me, because I would have cried for 6 months. Antonio Gibson was put on the COVID list, and Jarrett Patterson, he was a sneaky sleeper. I said it last week, and I've heard it all week. He had 20 points, and I didn't start him in my league, and he would have added some points to my score. But if you were lucky enough and you listen to me, and I don't know why I continuously not listen to myself, but if you started Patterson after Gibson went down, you were feeling real good. The wide receiver, Michael Gallup, tore his ACL, and now he is out for the season, and he will be a free agent at the end of the season. And this is just awful, because ACL tears take about a year to recover, and we're in week 17, so it looks like he possibly could not be back next year either, and that's just a big loss for a guy that was hoping to get paid and would have been able to become a team's possible number 1 and definitely a number 2. Kyle Pitts, he got injured throughout the game. He had 2 receptions for 69 yards. He had 8.9 fantasy points. And, Kyle Pitts was a guy with the tight end position we were really hoping to be able to rely on this year, but it just did not happen at all. And it was sad, because he was such a high draft pick, and we thought we were getting a steal at the tight end position, but it just never worked, because Matt Ryan is Matt Ryan, and Matt Ryan is not very good of a quarterback in fantasy. But I think once the Falcons figure out the quarterback position, I think Kyle Pitts will be a tight end we're going to be drafting in the future. Now that we talked about the injuries and the guys that left the game early or they didn't play, and if you had to figure out somebody else, now let's talk about the guys that costed you your week and guys that actually played, but they didn't do very much, and hopefully they didn't cost you a championship. DeAndre Swift is another guy. 5.9 points. I had him. He didn't do very good. Dan Campbell screwed us. He said he was going to get a lot of carries and everything, but we saw Jamal Williams. We saw Craig Reynolds. We saw Amon St. Brown even get some rushing attempts. It was just not okay. Dalvin Cook on Sunday night. I don't know if that was more of the Vikings offense just being crappy because Kirk Cousins was out. I don't know if this was Dalvin Cook. I don't know what was going on, but Dalvin Cook, another one, being such a high draft pick. Hopefully you didn't have him, and if you got there with him, you were obviously not going to sit him, and he only got 4.3 points. Javonte Williams, this is a my bad, people, and I don't know how the hell I survived because I had DeAndre Swift, I had Jamal Williams, and I had Cordell Patterson, and Cordell Patterson was about as bad at the last 3 weeks as some of these guys, and it was just not okay. But Javonte Williams was a huge disappointment, and maybe that was because of his injury, and I should have known not to start a guy that was questionable. He had 4.2 points, and it was not okay, and hopefully he didn't cost you. I got lucky, and I took home the ring, but hopefully you were as lucky as I was. Zeke Elliott, I don't know, Tony Pollard seems to be getting the ball more and being more involved in that passing game and everything. So I don't know about Zeke, but honestly, people, I'm staying away from him next year. He had 4 points, and I'm not relying on Zeke's 4 points in championship week and in fantasy next year. I'd stay away from him in all aspects. Myles Gaskin at 2.3 points, and then Myles Gaskin, if you were relying on Myles Gaskin, you were so lucky to get to the playoffs, you must have had a Cooper Kupp or Justin Jefferson, Jonathan Taylor possibly, but Myles Gaskin was just a huge disappointment, and I just could not rely on him at all. Hollywood Brown had 3.5 points, he had 3.8 points. 0.3 points ain't going to make a difference, though, Hollywood. You were supposed to have this great game with Tyler Huntley, but he looked Rashad Bateman way a little bit more. He looked Mark Andrews way. Thank God, Mark Andrews, you saved me. You the GOAT. Tight end 1 now, possibly. Jalen Waddle, he didn't have an awful game, but he only put up 7 points, and for the numbers that Waddle has been putting up, it's not what we were expecting in championship week. The tight ends, George Kittle had 4.5 points, and George the man, the people's tight end, he didn't do very well in championship week, but that was probably because of Trey Lance getting his third start of his career, and I think once that they work together a little bit more, I think that they'll be okay, and you're not going to not draft George Kittle next year because George Kittle is one of the best tight ends in the world. Dawson Knox, though. What happened? You did not catch anything? You put up a goose egg? That helps nobody. That was the biggest bust of the week. We thought you were going to go out and have a great game, and you couldn't even catch one ball? That helps nobody, and hopefully you weren't starting Dawson Knox in championship week. But if you were, I'm sorry, because that big goose egg may have cost you. And those are the disappointments for championship week, and those were the guys, if you had them, you probably lost, and you're probably sitting at home crying with second or third place, depending where you were finishing. But now, let's talk about the guys that were phenomenal on Sunday, and they put on a show, and they led you to a championship, and they took home all that money from you, and you might need to take some of these guys out to dinner, because I know I do, and this guy is the reason why I won and why I took home the championship. Jamar Chase, people. Rookie of the effing year. He put on a show. 11 receptions, 266 yards. He was going up and down the field, and he was catching everything in sight. He caught a 27-yarder on third and 27 and got the first down. He had 3 touchdowns, and Joe Burrow was like, hey, I'll just throw the ball to you every time, and that worked for me. He had 55.6 points, and if you had Jamar Chase, hopefully you won and you took home that championship, because if you didn't, that is just straight bad luck. And maybe the guy that you faced was smart, and maybe they had Joe Burrow, and this was a big reason on why my game was so close, because the guy I was facing had Joe Burrow, and I had Jamar Chase, and every time Burrow was throwing it, I was like, just throw it to Chase. Nobody but Chase. Don't throw it to T. Higgins or C.J. Uzama or Tyler Boyd. Only Chase. Joe Burrow put up 446 yards, 4 touchdowns, and he also put up 54 plus fantasy points. Joe Burrow, like I said in the fantasy headlines, if you had him in Chase, you probably had 110, 105, 107 points, whatever your scoring may be, and you were feeling real good. But if you were like me and you had one of the other guys and you were just freaking out, it was what it was. But those two put on a show, and to be honest, people, I need to keep every part of the Bengals in keeper leagues next year. And I don't care where you drafted them, you need to keep Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. Let's talk about a guy, though, in one of my leagues, he costed me. And hopefully he didn't do that to you, because the last 2 weeks he's been putting on an absolute show. Rashad Penny. He had 170 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 32.8 fantasy points. And if you had him, he led you to a ship, and he led you to a championship, and you were feeling real good. Tom Brady, the GOAT, the greatest of all time. He does his thing, and we talked about Antonio Brown a little bit earlier ago, and he didn't let that stop him. He put up 410 yards, 3 touchdowns, and he led the Buccaneers to a comeback win over the Jets. If the Buccaneers were going to lose to the Jets, that would not have been okay, and we might have been talking about this week about how Tom Brady might lose in the first round of the playoffs. But let's be real, people. We're probably going to see Tom Brady in the Super Bowl again. Russell Wilson came back, but it was a little bit too late for the Seahawks, but hopefully you started him in championship week because he put on a show. 236 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, and he had some rushing yards, and he just put on an absolute show, and he put up 30 fantasy points or 25 fantasy points again, depending on what your scoring is, and you were feeling real good. A little bit of a humble brag, Davante Adams. I said it last week. He was going to score 25 plus fantasy points, and he did just that, and he got 5 plus more. He had 11 receptions, 136 yards, and 1 touchdown, and he put up 30.6 fantasy points. And if you had Davante Adams and Aaron Rodgers, you were feeling real good after Sunday Night Football. DK Metcalf was a big contributor in the Seahawks passing game and Russell Wilson's success this week. He had 63 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns, and 30.9 fantasy points. And the guy I faced in one of my leagues sat him, and I guess he switched him out for Tyler Lockett, and I just got really lucky because if he started DK, I'd be sitting here crying right now. Amon St. Brown. I talked about him earlier a little bit, and this guy's been the best receiver. He actually is 4th overall the last 3 weeks, and in the playoffs, he had 8 receptions, 111 yards, 1 touchdown, and 35.4 fantasy points. Amon St. Brown is a guy that might easily be the number 1 for the Lions next year. And honestly, next year the Lions might not be as bad as they were this year. And a guy like St. Brown you could easily draft later on in the rounds, and he could be a very deep sleeper. Speaking of deep sleepers, I want to talk about 2 guys that put up 20 plus fantasy points, and they were 2 guys. I talked about them last week a little bit, and one of them was in my streams. Jarrett Patterson, he had 20.8 fantasy points. He scored a touchdown. He had 50 plus rushing yards. And because of Antonio Gibson's COVID injury and because he was out this past week, Jarrett Patterson had an opportunity to go out there versus the Eagles, and he took advantage of it in every which way. So if you were lucky enough to start Patterson versus a very good Eagles defense, and that was the only reason why I didn't start him, because I was thinking about it, but I was like, the Eagles defense is good. But I guess I should have just listened to myself. But somebody that hopefully you listened to me about last week on the other side of the ball for the Eagles, Boston Scott. I said it in my streams last week. Depending on who started, Jordan Howard or Boston Scott, I think both of them were both great players to start this week. So if you listen to me, you got 24.6 points, and maybe you took home that dub with Boston Scott at your flex. That would have been all good with me. And those are the studs on Sunday, and the guys that hopefully led you to a championship, and now you're sitting at home with all the money and your trophy at the side of your bed. Next on Tino's time, let's do rights and my bads. And this is where I do the stuff that I got wrong from last week, and I do a little bit of a humble brag about the things I got right. And this is just for me to have fun and gloat a little bit, or I just admit my mistakes, and I'm sorry if you listen to me. Hopefully it didn't cost you. Let's do the my bads. Javonte Williams. I talked about him a lot this season. I thought he was going to be a guy to lead you to a championship, and I thought he was going to be a big reason on why the Denver Broncos made a late run into the playoffs, and the Broncos won a game, and Javonte Williams I thought was going to lead you to a championship. But that just did not happen at all. Melvin Gordon was there still, and I know Javonte Williams has been dealing with an injury, but he was the 48th overall running back, and that just ain't going to do it for a guy that we thought was going to be in the top 10. And yes, he did show a lot of impressive stuff this season, and as long as Melvin Gordon is not on the team next year, I think that Javonte Williams will still be a good RB2, but this year in the playoffs and late in the season, he just didn't do it for us. Dawson Knox. I'm sorry, people. I told you to start him, and it just did not happen. He got a big goose egg, and we talked about it. We talked about it in the disappointments, and I'm sorry if you listen to me, and that is just my bad. Another my bad is I told you to stream Antonio Brown, and I told you that he was going to have 25 plus points, but he had a little bit of a game, and then he threw his little tantrum, and he cried off the field, and he jumped off the field, and again he did the RKO, and he was like, yeah, I'm done, and it just, I don't want to talk too much more about it because we've already talked a lot about it, but it just sucks for a guy that, like I said, great wide receiver, but he needs to get some type of help, and I hope and I wish him the best like everybody does, and I want to see him be good because we saw what happens when Antonio Brown can have a clear head and be one of the best receivers in the league. So hopefully you didn't start him and he didn't cost you a championship because he ran off the field facing the Jets, and he could have just stayed in the game and helped them came back and won. But let's now do the humble brags. And now this is where your boy Tino is going to gloat a little bit, and all the stuff that I told you last week, hopefully you listened to, and now you're celebrating the championship. Rashad Penny, I told you to start and stream him last week. Boston Scott, I just mentioned him in the studs of the week. I told you to stream him also. And with the help of my Chicago Bears, they put on a show versus Mike Glennon and that awful offense of the New York Giants. That defense looked like the defense from 1985, 2018, Monsters of the Midway. It was awesome to see, and yes, I know the Bears game didn't mean anything, but the Bears, fantasy football, they put up 21 points, and if you listened to me last week, I told you to stream them, and if you were, the Chicago Bears led you to a championship. Who thought we'd be saying that? But that's why this season has been so unpredictable. Damian Williams, I talked about it last week, number one waiver wire pickup. And if you were able to pick up Damian Williams or you kept him because of the CEH situation, you were feeling real good. He put up 25 plus points, and he's a big reason on why I won. I had a couple guys go off on my team like Jamar Chase, Aaron Rodgers, Damian Williams, and the Saints defense, and they were the reason why I won because, like we talked about in the disappointments, all my running backs scored a combined to like 15 points. It was awful. Devontae Adams, I mentioned it in the studs of the week, and I already gave myself a humble brag, but let's do it again. Devontae Adams, he got 30 points. I told you that he was going to get 25 last week. And I finally, people, got a game that was just fantasy gold in every which way and every aspect. The Kansas City Chiefs and the Cincinnati Bengals lived up to the hype of every game and everything that we expected. Everybody put on a show in fantasy. The Chiefs and Bengals proved that would be a really good playoff game, and I want to see that happen again. The Bengals did win 34-31, and Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase might be taking over as the new Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill, but little bit of a humble brag because I called that last week. Now I took a minute to gloat. Let's talk about the 3 things that I learned going in to next year's fantasy football season. And if you didn't win this year and you're disappointed, you didn't have a good season, injuries, COVID cost you, whatever it was, like I said earlier, whoever won fantasy football, and I honestly, I'm happy I won, but it was so crazy and so wild. I'm honestly happy the season is over, people, because it takes off so much stress having to worry about these guys being put on COVID, injuries, worrying about who's going to start, sit, play. Fantasy football I take as like a job, and it's as serious to me as real. I take it very serious. I know there's a lot of people like me, so I'm kind of happy it's over, but again I'm gonna miss it. So let's talk about the three things that I learned going into next season when I try to defend my title and become a two-time champion. Draft depth. Oh my God, depth. Draft people on your bench that you know are going to start and be good. We've seen it awful this year with injuries and COVID, and it's always good to have a good bench. I don't know why I can't say depth, but depth. You need to have depth on your fantasy football team. You guys know what I mean. I'm sorry I can't say it, but it means to have a good bench, and I don't know why I can't say it, but whatever. So have a good bench. I'll just say it that way. Have a good bench. Draft a good bench is what I'll say then. Draft a good bench to the point where you know that you're going to have guys on your team that if something happens next year, because we don't know how COVID's going to be and we don't know what's going to happen. So you want to make sure that you have these guys and you have a good bench to the point where if something happens, you're not going on the waiver wire and picking up somebody, the fourth string guy, and you're freaking out. You always want to have the guys on your bench that you know you can trust. So next year, I'm going to be very adamant about I might have 5 good running backs, but I don't care because I need to have 2 starters, 2 good running backs. I want to make sure that I have every which way set so I'm not having the situations that we dealt with this year. Fantasy football is so predictable. The second thing I learned, it's so unpredictable, people. We drafted Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, Zeke Elliott. We drafted all these guys in the top 5, top 6. Alvin Kamara did good though, but he had a really good bounce back season, even though he missed a couple games. There were so many guys that we drafted in the first to third rounds that now 18 weeks later, 17 weeks later, we're not even talking about them, and they weren't even the people that led us to a championship. I'll be talking about a little bit later on and a guy that helped me a lot because I drafted Derrick Henry, and we saw with the injuries, Derrick Henry went out, Christian McCaffrey went out, Saquon was out a lot, Dalvin Cook was out a lot. We saw guys like Alexander Madison, Javonte Williams a lot later on throughout the season, Damian Williams, David Montgomery was a huge running back later in the season. James Conner came out of nowhere and he looked like the guy that was on the Steelers. Fantasy football is so unpredictable, and the guys that we thought we'd be relying on weren't the guys we were relying on, and it's just crazy. So just remember that next year, that even the team that you draft on day one, they're not going to be the guys that you have, and you just never know what's going to happen. And next year, we'll be talking about a running back and a receiver and a rookie like we did this year that are helping us next year. It's so unpredictable. Speaking of guys and rookies and stuff like that, it is okay to take rookies. One of my big mistakes this season was not taking Najee Harris. There was a couple opportunities for me to take him, and I was very worried about having a rookie on my team, and especially on the Steelers offense. But he proved me wrong, and he proved to me that it's okay to take rookies, and it's okay to take rookie running backs. And if you get them later on, and if people don't know who they are, and if you draft with people that don't really pay attention, and you're crazy like I am with fantasy football, and you do your homework, but that's why I'm taking home the championship this year, and that's why they're sitting at home. But, it's okay to draft rookies, and it's okay to know that you could rely on somebody like a Najee Harris, and there's a guy, Dalvin Cook's brother, James Cook. He is going to be a rookie, and he might be drafted depending on what team he goes to, but he's a rookie that you need to watch out for next year. I don't know why I said James Conner. It's James Cook. It's Dalvin Cook's little brother, and it would just be cool to see Dalvin Cook and his little brother on the field together. So it's okay to draft rookies. And those are the 3 things that I learned going into next season. I cannot believe it, people. The fantasy football season is over. Now what? What do we do now, We've been sitting here for 17 weeks, setting our lineups, worrying about all these guys. And even though I said it a minute ago about how it's kind of relieving to not have to worry about it anymore, I still miss it because I love fantasy football and I take it as serious as a job. What are we going to do now? If you do daily fantasy football, that is pretty cool. Maybe you do a fantasy football playoff challenge. I do in one of my leagues. I would even check out NFLfantasyfootball.com or NFL.com fantasy football playoff challenge. I've been doing it for the last like 10 years. It's pretty cool. You pick a team, and then if the team advances, you keep that player, and then you get times to the points, and you're trying to build to the point where you have every guy in your team to have like a times 2, times 3, and even to maybe a times 4. Because if you take Patrick Mahomes from the wild card round all the way to the Super Bowl, in the Super Bowl, if he gets a touchdown, that means he got 4 touchdowns. So if he threw 4 touchdowns, that means it's 4, 8, 12. That means he threw 16 touchdowns, people. That's a lot of fantasy points. Imagine if that happened in the real fantasy football throughout the season. But check out all of those things, because those are the fun things that we could still do throughout the NFL season to still be in love with fantasy football. I'll be doing those. I love it. I can't get away from fantasy football. It's just addicting, people. But now what are we going to do here on Tino's Time? This is usually now where we talk about the waiver wire pickups, the starts, the sits, the streams, the top 5 flex options. But week 18, there's no way. Maybe some people, I really don't condone it. Maybe some people are fighting for their championships, and if you are, good luck. Take home that championship and take home that ring. But it's very hard this week, and I'll give you some advice for week 18. Pay attention to see what guys are sitting and starting, and what teams already clinched something and which teams aren't playing for anything. For example, like the Green Bay Packers. They're not playing for anything, and I cannot see a big reason on why Devontae Adams or Aaron Rodgers will play a lot, especially with Aaron Rodgers' toe and everything. Maybe they'll want to give him a week to heal and everything. But that's a reason why you should not do the championship in the last week of the the last week of the NFL season, because if the guys sit and, like, for example, I had Aaron Rodgers. If Aaron Rodgers were to be taking out my championship in quarter 2, I would lose, and that would be a big reason on why. So that's my biggest advice for week 18. If you're in the championship week and you're still playing, but that's just one of my big things is I worry about. So if you're still playing, good luck, and take home that championship and take home all that money from your friends. But if not, and your fantasy football season is over, and you still want to listen to your boy Tino's Time, instead this week of doing the things that we usually do, I'm going to give you my bold predictions for week 18. We're going to do the fantasy awards. I'm going to give you MVP, Rookie of the Year, waiver wire pickup, bust of the year, and top overall fantasy performance. And if you had those top 5 guys, you're probably celebrating. And then I'm still going to give you the 3 games that are going to be gold and 3 games to watch in week 18 that means something for the playoffs, or if you're playing for the championship still, these are the 3 games that I would really pay attention to. And then we're going to say goodbye to the fantasy football season, and then I'm going to let you know what we're going to be doing next here on Tino's Time. So let's get started with the bold predictions. And my first bold prediction for week 18 is we're going to see a tie, people. I don't know why. It's been so crazy and so unpredictable all season. I just think the NFL season is going to end in a crazier way, and we're going to see a tie in one of these games. And hopefully it's not a game that means too much playoff implications, but that would be really interesting to see how that happens. So if it happens, then give me a shout out on Twitter. Falcons are going to knock out the Saints. The Falcons are going to show up and play football the last week of the season. They're going to be like, Saints, you ain't getting into the playoffs, and they're going to knock them out, and they're going to give the 49ers the 6th seed in the NFC. The Steelers are going to find a way to make it into the 7th seed. I don't know how. I don't know which way. They need to win, and they need some help, but the Steelers are going to find a way to make the playoffs, and Big Ben is going to get an opportunity to play another game. We saw Big Ben Roethlisberger. I didn't mention it in the Monday Nighter, but it was probably, or I did mention it a little bit, but we didn't talk too much about it, is that it was probably his last home game, and he said goodbye to the Steelers fans, and he walked around to everybody, and he clapped their hands. And, Ben Roethlisberger is a guy like Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, that I've been watching my whole life, and it's just going to be weird to not see number 7, Big Ben Roethlisberger, getting sacked and being on the Steelers next season. But Thank you, Big Ben, for everything you've done and all the great memories you've left throughout my childhood and now my adulthood. So those are my 3 predictions for Week 18 going in to the last week of the NFL regular season. Now it's time to do the awards. It's time to talk about the guys that did phenomenal this season. Rookie of the year, you drafted a rookie that just put on a show and maybe led you to a championship. Waiver wire pickups, a guy that you picked up and helped you throughout the season with all the COVID and all the crazy injuries. Bust of the year, a guy, if you drafted him, he probably costed you all season long. And then we're going to talk about the best overall player. And when I say best overall player, this is a guy, he's not the MVP because there's so many MVPs, but this guy was a big reason, and he had the second most fantasy points throughout the season. So let's not waste any more time, and let's talk about all the amazing fantasy football awards. The first award I want to talk about is Rookie of the Year. I just talked about Najee Harris. We've seen so many other phenomenal rookies come out of nowhere. We saw Pat Freiermuth, Pittsburgh Steelers. I can't say it very right. That's okay, though. We've seen so many rookies come out of nowhere, but there's been one rookie this year that has been better than all of them. And it was the guy, we talked about him in the headlines, we talked about him in the studs of the week. He led you to a championship. He definitely led me to a championship, and I need to take this man out to dinner. It's Ja'Marr Chase. He had 79 receptions, 1,429 yards, 13 touchdowns, and he put up 299.9 fantasy points. Ja'Marr Chase was a guy in the preseason, in the beginning of the season. He had the dropsies. He couldn't catch the ball if it was thrown to him as in slow motion, and everybody was worried about him. And he fell very late in the rounds. My uncle got him in one of my leagues very late, and he definitely led him to the championship. Ja'Marr Chase is a guy, if you have him, I'm definitely doing it this year, next year. I'm keeping him, and I would not let Ja'Marr Chase go anywhere off your team because the Bengals offense is going to be deadly for years to come. So congratulations, Ja'Marr Chase, on winning Tino's time, Rookie of the Year. Yeah! I wish I could add sound effects and add like the clapping. That would be fun. Now, let's talk about the waiver wire pickup of the year. We've seen so many guys, and with COVID and with all the injuries and with the unpredictability of the season, we've seen so many guys like Alexander Madison. If you picked up Pat Freiermuth, I just mentioned, if you picked up, there's just so many guys that you possibly could have picked up. If you drafted them late, maybe you even thought about him and you weren't doing very good. He is the guy that plays every type of position. He helped me throughout the season, and even though he struggled the last 4 weeks of the season, if it was not for this man, I would have not won, and I would not have been in the championship at all. Jarrett Patterson. He is the waiver wire pickup of the year for me. He had 607 yards rushing, 6 touchdowns rushing, he had 51 receptions, 547 yards receiving, and he had 5 touchdowns. This man had 11 touchdowns, and he had 1,100 plus yards all season long. He didn't put up huge fantasy numbers, and he struggled a lot throughout the last weeks of the season. But if it was not for this man, if you were lucky enough to get him, he was probably a big reason on why you got to where you got. Because we saw guys like Derrick Henry, C-Mac, Dalvin Cook, Saquon Barkley. There were so many guys get out and go out that just was not okay. So Cordell Patterson, You're my waiver wire pickup of the year. And I always talk about it. There's always that one guy that always comes out of nowhere that does his thing and just puts on an absolute show. And also, Amon St. Brown is another one that was really good later on throughout the season and could be a waiver wire wonder and could be a very good wide receiver too next year. So there's just so many waiver wire pickups that we had, and I can't name all of them off the top of my head, but Jarrett Patterson, you win it, and you're taking home the championship. Waiver wire pickup of the year, Jarrett Patterson, Tino's Tom. Yeah, buddy. Now, I mentioned him a second ago. Let's talk about the bust of the year. And this guy, if you drafted him early or you drafted him late, he fell in my draft, and the guy that drafted him was like, hell yeah, I got Christian McCaffrey and Saquon Barkley. I'm winning the championship. And week 1, he started off 1-0. And the rest of the weeks, he didn't win any games, and he went 1-13. And, obviously, if C-Mac and Saquon Barkley were a lot more healthy, he would have done a lot better. But Saquon Barkley, even after he got healthy and he came back, the disastrous offense of the Giants has just been so bad to the point where Saquon Barkley, for being a late first round, early first round possibly, maybe people drafted him really high, or even late second round, was not worth it at all. He didn't even surpass 150 fantasy points. He had 563 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns, 38 receptions, 244 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns. He only finished with 142 fantasy points, and that just is not going to do it for me. Now, my last 2 awards, it is the top overall player and the MVP. And these 2 players were going back and forth, and I couldn't figure out which way to put them because they both played so good. So first, let's talk about the best player overall, Jonathan Taylor. This is another guy late in the offseason and early in drafts. Everybody was worried about taking this man. He was getting carries taken away from him by Marlon Mack, Nyheim Hines. He wasn't getting the ball, and everybody was like, I don't want to take this man. But I took a shot on him in one of my leagues, and if you took a shot on him, he became the best player. And honestly, if it wasn't for Cooper Kupp having the type of season that he's having, he would have won fantasy MVP from me. But Jonathan Taylor was the best overall player. He had 1,700 yards, 1,734 yards to be exact, 18 touchdowns. He had 37 receptions, 342 yards receiving, and he had 364.6 fantasy points. Jonathan Taylor, if you had him on your team, you probably had a really good season, and maybe you didn't win the championship. I didn't win the championship in that league where I had Jonathan Taylor, but that's okay because Jonathan Taylor made my fantasy football season so much fun for putting on a show every single week and scoring touchdowns and being that guy that we know we can rely on. So next year, if you have Jonathan Taylor and you are in a keeper league, sadly I'm not in that league, I keep Jonathan Taylor, and he's another one. I'm not letting him be taken away. But now, let's talk about the guy that won MVP for fantasy football, and he is breaking records left and right. He's probably going to break the receiving record in this upcoming Sunday, and he's a guy that last year I got made fun of for taking him over DK Metcalf, and I screwed up last year, and I stayed away from him this year, and that's probably why he did it. But Cooper Kupp, and this is probably because Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp have breakfast every morning, and they sit there and like, oh my God, Matthew, I love you. Oh my God, Cooper, I love you. Whatever the hell they do early in the morning. But Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford had a connection that was absolutely ridiculous. Cooper Kupp had 138 receptions, 1,829 yards. Yes, I said that. He's almost going to hit 2,000. And who knows, if he has 181 yards next week, and he could very well do that, he will hit 2,000. He had 15 touchdowns and 412.9 fantasy points. Cooper Kupp had the most fantasy points throughout any player this season by a long shot. I think Jonathan Taylor was the closest to him. Cooper Kupp proved why he could be a receiver number one next year, and he's another guy. I ain't letting nobody take him because you probably drafted him later on in the draft. And if you're in a league where you lose your pick, where you keep your guys, I'd keep Cooper Kupp all day because you probably took him in the ninth round. And if you have Cooper Kupp in the ninth round, that's a number one receiver, and you could just draft whoever the hell you want the first 8 rounds. And that's why Cooper Kupp is MVP, and it's going to be real interesting to see what he does in Week 18 of the NFL regular season, and let's see if he can surpass 2,000 yards. And those are your Tino's Time awards for the 2021 fantasy football season. It's been a wild year, and I cannot believe how fast it went. It's crazy, it's wild, and it's just ridiculous. And just congratulations to all these guys, and hopefully you had these 5 guys and they led you to a championship. But now it is time to say goodbye. Yes, I said it. It's time to say goodbye. I cannot believe how fast the fantasy football season is went. I'm honestly, like I mentioned earlier, I'm kind of happy it's over. I'm relieved, and yes, I'm going to miss it. But this season has been too crazy, too wild. It's put too much stress on me. And, I got too much to worry about in my life. I'm tired of worrying about these athletes making too much money, and I'm worried about over here making $400. But, fantasy football is always fun, and it definitely gives me a reason on why to watch football every single week, especially with the way my Chicago Bears are playing. Hopefully they do better. They've definitely played a lot better. Congratulations. Let's give a big shout out to Robert Quinn for breaking the sack record for the Chicago Bears. After being paid all that money last year and had an awful season, he came back this year and he proved on why he was a big reason, why that Bears defense looked a lot better than they did the past weeks and last season in general. But even though the Bears sucked, and that's okay, good job, Robert Quinn. You deserve it. But now what are we going to do here on Tino's Time? Are you not going to see me every week? What are we going to do? We not going to see it till the football season, only Tino's Time Wrestling? What's going to happen? No, I'm still going to be here every single week for you. Just now, we're going to talk about the actual football and the actual regular season, and we're not going to talk about fantasy. And yes, I'm sure I'll still bring up fantasy because fantasy is in my blood, and I'm always going to bring it up. But we're going to be doing a playoff preview. We're going to preview the wild card round. I'm going to give you everything that I think is going to happen in the first round of the playoffs. After week 18 is over, after the playoffs are set, I'm going to come back. We're going to preview all the action. We have games on Saturday, Sunday, and then we even have a playoff game on Monday in the wild card round. And I think Peyton and Eli are doing it, which is kind of cool. So I cannot wait to see which teams clinch a playoff spot and which teams don't make it in week 18. I love that there's 18 weeks now in the football season. It's awesome. Gotta love having football every single week because once it's over, there's nothing on until baseball. And baseball, I love baseball, but baseball should not start in March. And who knows? It's probably going to still be snowing in Chicago, and the White Sox and Cubs aren't going to be able to be playing anyway. So that's a big reason why I think that the baseball season should be moved, but that's a summer sport, and we'll be talking about that when we get closer to the baseball season. So I hope, again, congratulations to all the champions. I'm sorry if you lost. Congratulations to the people that won third place because, hey, you win third place, you probably took home a little bit of money. I took home some money for winning third place in one of my leagues, and hey, if you take home some money or you get your money back for the year or you get paid for the next year, that's a bonus, right? And you're just playing fantasy football for free. And that's why next year, if you didn't win, do your scouting and make sure you pay attention to the playoffs because some of these guys could go off, and we also want to keep an eye out on Derrick Henry to see if King Henry, returns in the playoffs. Because if he does, and he does show that he can be the guy that he was earlier on, he's another one I ain't letting go of. And I just keep reminding you because we want to make sure that we look forward to next season now that the 2021 NFL fantasy football season is over. So until next week, when we preview the wild card round and we talk about all the teams that clinched and we talk about where everybody's going and which teams are sitting at home chilling, I hope everybody enjoyed our fantasy football season. Thank you for supporting me. Don't forget to go smash that subscribe button, like, follow at Tino Time 1996 on Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, all your social medias, everywhere you listen to your podcast. And until next week, when we preview Wild Card Weekend, this is your boy Tino signing out.